Jim, Syracuse, New York, Sirius Satellite. Go.
Hi, Mark. I'm calling about the watch list. I think it's important for people who are unfamiliar with the system to understand a little bit about how it works. I'm a retired police officer, police investigator, 30 years in the state of New York, and I understand how this system works. And what people don't realize is that it's non-elected bureaucrats who get to put your name on the list. In theory, it's supposed
Let me slow down. You're saying it's unelected bureaucrats who put the name on the list, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
In theory, it's supposed to be based on a legitimate police or DHS investigation. A legitimate case has to be opened in order to put somebody on the list. But you don't have to have a whole lot of cause to open a case against somebody.
According to the ACLU, there's over 1 million people on this list.
Exactly. I know of one situation a few years back in the Buffalo area where a JTTF member put his ex-girlfriend on the list. He subsequently got fired and arrested, but that's how easy you can be put on the list.
So how did we get to a debate over this list from Orlando to a debate over this list?
Well, it's an attempt to deflect from this administration's inability to protect this country.
That's perfectly put.
That's why we're where we're at. But more importantly, it's not on the surface. It sounds logical to people to put people on the terrorist watch list should not have guns, but we have to look at the unintended consequences of what's going to happen. Lois Lerner comes to mind. You look at the IRS and the scandal involving Lois Lerner and the Tea Party conservatives. If you've got an unelected bureaucrat who has the power to put your name on a list which can deprive you of your constitutional rights, what's to keep that list from becoming a political enemies list? Case in point, Hillary Clinton just recently said or compared the NRA to terrorists. What's to keep a president...
So did the New York Times editorial page, by the way.
What's to keep Hillary Clinton, President Clinton, from declaring the NRA a terrorist organization?
Well, what's to keep them... remember the history here, too. You make a good point. Remember the history here, which is 1,000 FBI files that showed up at the White House and nobody could ever explain it. Remember that?
Exactly. Where'd they go? How'd they end up there? That's the problem, is this... and when I hear Democrats say they don't want a law that's going to enable people put on the list due process, I have to ask myself, why don't they want people to have due process? By law, people that have access to the terrorist watch list, and there's also other watch lists. People don't realize there's a violent gang watch list. There's organized crime watch list. There's other lists out there, databases that when somebody encounters the police and their name is run through the database, it goes back to the federal agencies, whoever put their name in that list or on that list. So people have to know that there's other lists.
Let me ask you a quick question before we lose our time here. This list, does the list record who puts the person on the list? Do you know?
It will tell you to call a number. You don't necessarily know who. What happens is if, as a police officer, you find somebody on the list, it tells you to call a number with, say, the FBI. You call that number, and then they will tell you how to proceed from there. Okay. You're not given a lot of information, and you need to know that people who have access to that information, people who call in and find out, they're prohibited by law from telling anybody on the watch list that they're on the watch list. So if you go into a gun store and you want to buy a gun and you're on that list unfairly, they can't tell you that you're on the list. So how are you
I just want to make another point as well, which is this. Just because you're not on a list doesn't mean there's not a criminal file with your name on it. And this is my point about the mass murder in Orlando. All this talk, well, he dropped off the list. Well, who cares? The FBI had a file on this guy. The FBI had data on this guy. The FBI had its interview notes on this guy.
You know, you mentioned a few minutes ago about the Federalist Papers, and there's a beautiful discussion where Alexander Hamilton is arguing about including the Bill of Rights in the Constitution, and he's arguing against it. He says, if we include this on
30 seconds.
if we include this on there, eventually somebody's going to come along who intends to usurp power, and they're going to come along and they're going to make a reasonable case that this is a power that has been granted by the federal government instead of by God. And it's a beautiful quote.
Well, thank you for your call. You've been an excellent caller. I want you to call again. We're running out of time, but just to put the whole thing in context. The reason why there wasn't an original so-called Bill of Rights is because Mason, among others, argued exactly your point. They didn't want the people to think that these rights came from the government. And the list could go on and on and on, they argued. That's one of the reasons, by the way, we have a Ninth Amendment.